What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt, and I'm back, and today we're going to talk about Core 20 Cube cards. Another set. Thank you, Wizards. I appreciate the cards. Also, I could use a break. I'm a little burned out. But that's not the point. The point is, we're going to talk about Core 20 cards and which ones are good in our cube. I actually think there aren't a lot of great choices here. I'm even going to go over some cards that I don't necessarily think make the cut, but I wanted to be as thorough as possible, so let's get started. First up on our list is Ajani's Strength of the Pride. For 2 and double white, you get a legendary Planeswalker Ajani. +1, you gain life equal to the number of creatures you control plus the number of Planeswalkers you control. -2, create a 2/2 white cat soldier creature token named Ajani's Pridemate with whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on Ajani's Pridemate. And his 0 ability, if you have at least 15 life more than your starting total, you may exile Ajani's Strength of the Pride and each artifact and creature your opponent controls. A lot of text on that walker. And here's the deal, it's just not that good. And let me tell you why. His plus ability is not that great, it's a life gain ability. It does help feed his 0 ability or his ultimate ability. However, you have to have creatures and walkers on the field, so he's really bad on an empty board. He does make a 2/2 Ajani's Pridemate to protect himself, which is kind of neat. And his ultimate is great, but again, as I said before, we don't build life gain decks in Cube. Life gain is just not that strong. The other major drawback to Ajani is his mana cost. The 4 mana spot in Cube, in Planeswalkers, in white, is just really competitive. Gideon ally of Zendikar is the boss and probably the most played 4 mana white Planeswalker. And Sarah the Benevolent is a house. If you're playing her, like, good for y'all. I think she's a little unfair, but she's way better, way stronger than Ajani, who I think is probably at least the 3rd, if not the 4th best white 4 mana Planeswalker. And so he's just not good enough to make the cut in most cubes. If you're playing a low-powered cube with a life gain theme, maybe, but I think the rest of us are probably just taking a pass on this card. And unfortunately, I think that's all white really offers us in Core 2020. So let's get moving to blue, who has a few interesting cards for us. Number 1 of which is the Spectral Sailor. For 1 blue, you get a creature spirit pirate with flash, flying, and pay 4, 3 and a blue, draw a card. So this card is a Flying Man. Flying Man has been around forever, and Wizards has been trying to get us to play Flying Men forever as well, trying to just tack on just a little more ability, just a little more utility to see if we will play them in our decks and in our cubes. And Flying Men doesn't see much cube play, but the Spectral Sailor might be worth playing, and he's probably slammable if you're in a peasant cube. 1 mana flyer with flash and card draw tacked on it in a peasant cube feels really, really strong. But in a traditional unpowered or powered cube, you're probably only going to play this card if you're trying to support a theme like Blue Tempo. I don't think it's good enough to make the cut otherwise. But it is really interesting, and it might be worth playtesting, especially if you're at a lower power level or trying to support Mono Blue Tempo. Still, let's keep going, because blue has a really interesting card for us to look at this set, and that's Cavalier of Gales. And I have to tell you, honestly, this card is really hard for me to evaluate. I just can't decide whether I love it or whether I hate it or whether it's not good enough or whether it's busted. I'm just not 100% sure. So let's look at it and walk through it together. For 2 and triple blue, 5 mana, we get a creature elemental knight, a 5/5 flyer with, when Cavalier of Gales enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. That's Brainstorm for those of you who's forgotten that card, boys and girls. And then when Cavalier of Gale dies, shuffle it into its owner's library, then scry 2. Gales is just a straight up value engine. You draw 3 when it enters, you scry 2 when it leaves. The draw is going to help it replace itself in your hand or provide you with answers to protect it after it hits the board. And then even if your opponent manages to get rid of it, it shuffles back into your library and you get to draw 2. And all this card draw for me stacks it up against another blue 5-drop that we're all really familiar with in Cube, and that's Mulldrifter. Mulldrifter has been a Cube all-star for years. This card is so good. Pay 5, 2/2 flyer. When it comes into play, draw 2, which is great, or you can evoke it for 3. And maybe, just maybe, Cavalier of Gales is going to replace Mulldrifter. The real downside when you compare these two cards is that you can't evoke Gales. You just can't, right? Whereas if you're desperate and you really need the card draw, you can evoke the Mulldrifter and just straight draw 2 cards. I think this is a card that I'm going to have to playtest more in my cube to really figure out, is it better than Mulldrifter? But there is another option, and that is that Cavalier of Gales costs 5. What are the 5 drops that it's competing against other than Mulldrifter? Well, a lot of people still play Moloku, the Clouded Mirror, and I really like this card because when she comes down, if you untap, she can just take over the game, making these 1/1 blue illusion creature tokens on the battlefield, and really put your opponent on the clock. And even if your opponent kills Moloku, you get to keep all the tokens. And so that's one of the spots that I think Gales is competing against. Maybe he's good enough to replace Moloku because of all the value, but Moloku has the tendency to just end games if she's not answered. But so does Cavalier of Gales. So again, I'm just not 100% sure where this card falls. Let's look at a card that I am sure about where it falls, and that's Mu Yanling, the Sky Dancer. For 3 mana, 1 and double blue, you get a legendary Planeswalker, Yangling. +2 until your next turn, up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 and loses flying. -3, create a 4/4 blue elemental bird creature token with flying, and -8, a fantastic ultimate. You get an emblem with islands you control have tap, draw a card. Now I have to admit, I would love for my islands to have tap, draw a card. But I'm going to go ahead and fess it up to you. Mu Yanling is just not good enough. And let me tell you why. First, you can't use her minus the turn she comes down. So you're not making that bird. You're going to have to plus her. So you plus her and try and shrink one of your opponent's creatures and it loses flying. And maybe that protects her. But maybe she takes damage because their creature is a 4/4. Hopefully not, because you're playing her on curve on turn 3. But she's just not good enough. Let me show you who she's competing against. Jace Beleren just straight draws you cards, which is wonderful. And you can plus him too, and then draw cards for 5 straight turns if left unmolested. Or if you need to, and you can't afford to let your opponent draw, you can just start drawing cards off of him right away. And if you ever hit that ultimate in cube, that's backbreaking. Making your opponent mill 20 into their graveyard in a cube match is just oof, game over, turn out the lights. But I think the 3-drop she's really competing against is Narset, who I have just been wildly impressed with in so many formats. This is a really good 3-mana uncommon walker. The fact that she will dig 4 cards deep into your library twice is essentially a draw 8, or a filter 8, if you will. Narset is really, really good, and there's just no room for Mu Yanling. She's just not going to make the cut for me, and probably not in any cube. Let's keep going. Moving on to black, we get a card that's caused a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion in the cube forums, and that's Rotting Regisaur. Woo! Zombie dinos! For 2 and a black, you get a zombie dinosaur. At the beginning of your upkeep, discard a card, and it's a 7/6. Oh, it's a 7/6. Yeah, it's a, whew, no, that's a zombie. So here's the thing. A 7/6 is gigantic, and the idea that you could turn 1 Dark Ritual and just cast him is like living the dream. Or that you could turn 1 Mana Dork, turn 2 Rotting Regisaur, that also feels really good. Now the downside is supposed to be that at the beginning of your upkeep, you discard a card. And that is a downside. You know, losing cards from your hand sucks. Unless, because you're in black, you start stacking your deck with effects that reward you for being discarded. For example, discarding Bloodghast always feels really good because whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you just toss the Bloodghast back onto the battlefield. Cards with Flashback, cards with Jumpstart, all of them work really, really well with Regisaur, along with any other Reanimator targets you want to just toss into your yard as well. So that maybe you can construct a deck where the Regisaur is not going to be that big of a downside. And the good news is you don't have to sacrifice him if you can't discard. So if you play him on turn 3 or turn 4 because you didn't get to ramp or dump out your hand or do something really cool early, then if you're in an aggro deck, chances are it's not that punishing because your hand is pretty close to empty anyway. So I'm going to playtest the Regisaur. I want this card to be good, but when he swings in and gets blocked by a 1/1 and then I have to discard on my upkeep, That's not going to feel great, and I'm curious about how much stuff I can keep in my hand that I want to discard to feed the Regisaur, and how often I'm going to have to discard where it stings a little bit. And I think if you find that your cube discards and is happy about it more often than not, that the Regisaur is really playable. And if you find yourself being able to discard the first time, but the second or third discard really hurt and your opponent's able to chump block him just once or twice, you're going to find yourself on the back foot and giving up a lot of gas. Still, I'm excited to playtest the Riding Regisaur. Black also offers us another card that people have been talking about, and that's Billis, Broker of Blood. For 5 and triple black, you get a legendary creature demon that is an 8/8 flyer, because we are all about big creatures in this set, it seems. For 1 black, you may pay 2 life. Target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of turn. Whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. You'll notice that Wizards has pointed it out to you on the card, damage causes loss of life. They want you to understand that you're going to lose life in combat, and you're going to lose life when you trigger his ability. When you pay the black and give that creature -1/-1, you're going to lose 2 life and draw 2 cards. So that ability really reads, pay 1 black, lose 2 life, draw 2 cards, target creature gets -1/-1, and that is pretty awesome. Now, I can hear some of you saying that his mana cost is restrictive, and it is, but that's because this card is not meant to be played fairly. This guy is a born and bred reanimator target. He's an 8/8 flyer. He ends the game in 3 swings. So you're going to want to run him in some kind of recursion package, toss him in the yard, bring him back to life, etc. And this card is really, really good. The obvious comparison is easy, and that is the granddaddy of all cube demons, Grizzlebrand. For 4 and quadruple black, you get a 7, these mana costs are just insane. You get a 7/7 demon with flying and lifelink, pay 7 life, draw 7 cards. So, Grizzlebrand for me is just better, because you can draw all 7 cards at once, and then he swings in and gains you that life right back so you can do it all over again. That is a great reanimator target. Just fantastic, and tons of value when you play him, because you're going to draw 7 immediately. Whereas Villas is a slightly fairer version of Grizzlebrand. In order for him to draw the cards, you're going to have to pay 4 mana, 8 life. I mean, you do get to kill a creature off of it, and that'll let you draw 8 cards. So I think Villas is a card for new cubers, people who don't have Grizzlebrand because his price is starting to drift up a little bit, or they're looking for a budget option. I think Villas is fine. Grizzlebrand is just better. So again, if you're looking for a budget option, I think Villas is your boy. Now we can move on to red and talk about a card I was really excited about, I have to admit, stoked about her, and that is Chandra, Awakened Inferno. For 4 and double red, we get a legendary Planeswalker Chandra who can't be countered, because we need more of those effects in Magic. Sorry, blue players. +2, each opponent gets an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, this emblem deals 1 damage to you. -3, Chandra Awakens Inferno deals 3 damage to each non-elemental creature, and -X, Chandra Awakened Inferno deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker. If a permanent dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. So Chandra is a 6 mana control-y walker. She's not meant to just end the game the turn she comes down. What you're supposed to do, in theory, is that you plus Chandra and give your opponent these emblems. So on turn 1, you give them an emblem and they take 1 damage. And on the next turn, you give them another emblem and now they're taking 2 damage during their upkeep. And so she's going to slowly wear them down through attrition. And she can protect herself. 3 damage to each non-elemental creature is a nice board wipe for a lot of cards in Cube. And if you have to, you can minus her the turn she comes down and deal X damage to target creature or planeswalker and exile it, which would give you the option if you wanted to go all the way of 6. You could deal 6 damage to a creature or planeswalker. And I was so excited about this card, but the more I looked at her, the more I realized that she's probably not better than our current red 6 mana planeswalker, and that is Chandra Flamecaller. So Chandra's +1 is that she makes 2 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste. You exile at the beginning of your next end step. So rather than putting your turn on a slow 1 point to damage this turn, 2 points this turn, 3 points the next turn, Chandra swings in for 6 when you plus her for the first time. Now she doesn't protect herself quite the way that Chandra Awakened Inferno does, because her board wipe, her protection, is actually her last ability. but you can deal X damage to each creature, so you could take her to 1 and deal 3, or minus her all the way and deal 4 to every creature on the board. It's her middle ability that I think really separates her from Awakened Inferno. Discard all the cards in your hand and then draw that many cards plus 1. Now what I think this does is make Chandra Flamecaller a planeswalker that a lot of different decks in your cube could want, but Awakened Inferno is only going to be wanted by like a dirtily slower control deck. Awakened Inferno is a 6-mana control walker, and Chandra Flamecaller could be played in the control deck. They would love to draw all those cards, or to put their opponent on a turn clock with those elementals, or to wipe the board with the minus ability. But it could also be a mid-rangey planeswalker for like a Gruul mid-range deck or something like that. So I think the Flamecaller is just more flexible. I still really like Awakened Inferno, I'm not going to lie. I might playtest it anyway. However, in a vacuum, Flamecaller is probably more flexible and probably wanted by more decks in your cube, and is therefore probably the better walker to be playing. But let's keep going. After all, there's a couple of colors left, sort of. We got multicolored and green. Here we go. Shifting Ceratops. For 2 and double green, we get a creature dinosaur. What are we, still on Ixalan? This spell can't be countered. Protection from blue. Pay a green. Shifting Ceratops gains your choice of reach, trample, or haste until the end of turn. This card is interesting. Protection from blue is not my favorite. I don't really like the protection mechanic in cube in general. It feels a little unfair. I don't like the play patterns that come from it. But a 4-mana can't be countered. That's good, right? That's solid. Pay a green, give it a different ability, and wait a minute. I know you. I know who you're pretending to be. You want to be Thrun the Last Troll. Well, let me tell you something, Shifting Ceratops. You are no Thrun. I've grown up with Thrun. I know Thrun. You are not Thrun, because Thrun has Hexproof. And I think Hexproof is actually a better ability than Protection from Blue. After all, Hexproof stops Swords to Plowshares, and Path to Exile, and Doomblade. And if all of that wasn't enough, yeah, the Ceratops could have Reach, Trample, or Haste, but Thrun can be regenerated. Thrun is the best 4-drop in cube. You're going to play him over the Ceratops every time. Now, the 4-mana slot in green isn't great. You could play the Ceratops if you wanted to. I just don't know that I want 2 4-mana creatures that are this similar. And if you have to pick between the 2 of these guys, it's Thrun all day, every day. Ceratops just doesn't make the cut for me. I just don't like the protection mechanic, and I think Thrun is just a better card. But there is a really interesting card in green that I'm super excited to talk about, and that is Voracious Hydra. For X and double green, you get a Hydra 0/1 with Trample. Voracious Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When Voracious Hydra enters the battlefield, choose one. Either double the number of +1/+1 counters on the Hydra, or Voracious Hydra fights target creature you don't control. This card is flexible, and it's a real tempting card to try out. But the key is we have to figure out what the ideal mana cost is. After all, you don't want to cast this card for 1 or 2. Most of the time, you're not going to cast it for 10. So when is it good? And I think that number is about 3. If you cast Voracious Hydra for 3 and choose to fight a creature, odds are you can kill a lot of different creatures in cube, and only the biggest threats are going to survive. But at 3, if you double the number of +1/+1 counters on it, you're getting a 6/6 Trampler, and that's pretty good too. So I think 3 is the magic number, which makes Voracious Hydra a 5-drop. Since he's a 5-drop, the obvious comparison is to Colonian Hydra, who's also a 5-drop, and a Hydra, and Tramples, and lots of +1/+1 counter synergies, so all of that is still there. And if you're comparing him against Colonian Hydra, I think you pick Voracious Hydra all day. And it's the simple fact that Voracious Hydra has the upside of being able to remove creature threats. You know, Voracious Hydra can be cast to eat Ophiomancer or other smaller creatures in your cube, and a 6/6, 8/8, 10/10 body is just fine. It puts your opponent on a very quick clock. Yes, Colonian Hydra gets bigger and bigger, but Colonian Hydra doesn't pass the Vindicate test. Your opponent can kill him the turn he comes down, and you got no value. Whereas it's possible you play the Voracious Hydra, get some value, and eat another creature. I think in my cube, the card that I'm actually comparing Voracious Hydra against in terms of trying to get a spot is the Verdurous Gearhulk. My cube's a little smaller, it's a little tighter, so I don't play the Colonian Hydra, I play the Gear Hulk instead. He enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters, and I can distribute them amongst any number of creatures I control. So, I can make the Gear Hulk an 8/8. I can make the Gear Hulk a 5/5 and put 3 counters somewhere else. I can give all of my other creatures, if I've got up to 4 of them, +1/+1. So there's a lot of flexibility with the Gear Hulk, and he works with artifact synergies as well. He's actually a tinker target if you're so inclined. So there's a lot of flexibility with the Gear Hulk as well. I think I'm going to pull the Gear Hulk just for a little while and play test the Hydra. I'm not sure he's as good as the Gear Hulk. If you're running Colonian Hydra, I think it's just a straight upgrade. You play Voracious Hydra over him. But it's a really interesting card, and I think it fits in the 5 slot in green. So Voracious Hydra is probably worth playtesting. The last card I want to look at from Core 20 is a multicolored Jeskai card, and you've probably already figured out that I want to talk about Kaikar, Wind's Fury. For 1 in Jeskai, you get a Bird Wizard, that's a 3/3 with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, sacrifice a spirit, add a red to your mana pool. For my money, this is probably the most cubable card in the set, and it's that way for a couple of reasons. Reason number 1 is that 4 for a 3/3 flyer is just not that bad, especially when it has the Super Power-S ability. And what I mean by that is Power-S normally only triggers off instants and sorceries, but Kaikar will trigger off of any non-creature spell. So Planeswalkers make spirits, artifacts make spirits, enchantments make spirits. So you're gonna have a lot of spirit tokens on the battlefield, and anytime your opponent tries to blow them up, you could always sack them off for mana if you really need to. Or you can use him to kind of storm off in like a storm combo deck where you play the spell, it triggers, it makes the spirits, but then you sack the spirits for more mana so that you can keep storming off. So this card I think is really interesting and really good, and probably is the most cubable card in this set, and I'll tell you why for one reason. A lot of cubers play at least one tricolored shard card in their cube for each shard, and the big problem with this is that most of them just aren't good enough. And so for a long time, cubers have been playing cards like the Soulfire Grandmaster. And Grandmaster is fine, or good even, in a lower power cube, but as your cube becomes more refined, as it becomes stronger, the Grandmaster just doesn't cut the mustard anymore. And so if you want to play a card from each shard, she's actually your best Jeskai option. Until now. Because you see, Kaikar replaces her completely. Soulfire is meant to support a Jeskai spells mattery kind of deck, and Kaikar does that beautifully because now every time you cast the spell, you don't have to spend 4 mana to get value off of it. Instead, you're going to be making spirit creature tokens, which you can sack and cast more spells and on and on. So I actually think that Kaikar is the best cube card in this set if you're running shards inside your cube. I think he is a clear upgrade over the Soulfire Grandmaster, again, if you're trying to support shards. Well, whew, that's going to do it for today, cubers. I think Core 20 is just okay. I don't think there's a whole lot of cube staples, but quite frankly, maybe that's the best. I don't know about the rest of y'all. I have had trouble trying to test the War of the Spark, the Modern Horizons, and oh, now here's a new set, so maybe it's good for us that there aren't a whole lot of cube staples in here. Still, that's going to do it for us today. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Did I miss a card? Do you think I misevaluated one? Check us out on the Twitter at cubefortwo. Like, subscribe, all the good things. And as always, and until next time, shuffle up and keep cubing, my friends.